unless you really know what the person is going through. I mean, this is something that never leaves us. It's always a part of my story now. It's not something that I'll overcome and put behind me.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 164, and I'm recording this the day after Mother's Day, and this will have been my fourth Mother's Day since finding out I was an NPE. And this day was really hard, year number one and year number two, if I were going to be completely honest. And I was just reflecting on this yesterday during Mother's Day, and I think it was better this year. I think year number 4, Mother's Day as an NPE, was better. I have some emotional exhaustion today. Just some after effects of thinking through my childhood, thinking through family secrets and my mom. But on Mother's Day, it was pretty enjoyable, and maybe about a half hour to an hour of some bad feelings, but significantly better than the previous years. And I just mention this because we have a lot of NPEs and late discovery NPEs listening to this show that just found out. And these holidays can be really hard and challenging. So just wanted to bring it up because I see you. I've been there. I get it. I have in front of me something called the loss cycle. I saw it on some of the NPE forums on Facebook. I'm actually going to post it on the NPE Stories Facebook page because it's pretty helpful. It's called the loss cycle. I'm sorry, I don't know who to credit this to. It looks like a sketch starts with losses at the top, and this could be loss of a relationship, a death, losing a job, and then going through all these stages, the anger, denial, resentments, grief. And as it circles around, it says, quit fighting, out of surrender comes strength. And on the other side of this cycle, there's hope, faith, acceptance, serenity, and eventually new life. And I just thought this was really helpful to look at. And someone said, you should bring that up on the podcast. So I did. And I will post it on the NPE Stories Facebook page if you haven't already seen it. And today we are going to get to an NPE and listen to their story. Today I am speaking with Shawn. Hi, Shawn.
Hi, Lily. How are you?
I'm good. I'm better today than yesterday. I'm doing good. How was your Mother's Day?
Oh, it was great. Thank you. I ended up taking my mom out for lunch the day before to beat the crowd. She's not really a crowd person, but enjoyed getting out for the day. So we got out and did some things and went for a lunch, and it was a good time.
Now that's a good idea. I need to tell my husband, take me out the day before Mother's Day. That's smart. I like it. I just opened your latest email. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at a picture of you and your biological father.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a little uncanny.
oh my gosh. You guys look identical. Oh, wow.
Yeah, if my picture was black and white, you would think they were the same pictures.
Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. Oh, okay, Shawn. So let's get into your story today because I want to see how this came to be. So why don't you start with your family of origin and let us know what your childhood was like?
Sure. So growing up, my family was a blended family. Both my mom and dad had two children from previous marriages. My dad, and both had married fairly young. My dad had a son and daughter from his first marriage, and my mom had two daughters from her first marriage. And then, as the story goes, I was next in line after they met, and then had a younger uh, sister after that, born after me. So two of his, two of hers, and then two of theirs. That was the original story. So growing up, my dad worked at a factory where they typically went on strike every 3 or 4 years. We didn't have a lot to live off of, but my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and dad worked at the factory. And when they did have a strike, he would typically go fishing every day to provide for the family, or scavenge what he could, do odd jobs. It was not an easy upbringing, but we never went without a roof over our heads, and never missed a meal. So, and I enjoyed having mom at home also. Uh, we were, from my perspective, we really never went without anything. Um, we in about eighth grade, I think it was, when I was in the eighth grade, we ended up moving. I don't think I mentioned the location. We lived in Tacoma at the time. We ended up moving to a suburb quite a ways away, and ended up switching schools, of course, and just reintegrating into a new social dynamic in middle school and high school. And so that was a pretty tough transition for me. I was with a lot of students who had known each other from elementary school up through middle school, and now just joining that group and trying to integrate myself into all of that. And then not long after that, moving on to high school with, again, more people who had known each other for a very long time. So it was an interesting adjustment for myself, and for my siblings as well. My dad's daughter from his first marriage, she actually lived with her mom, so I didn't see her too much, pretty much just at holidays. My dad's son did live with us. He and my mom had a bit of a contentious relationship. I was probably too young at the time to really recognize it or know really what the cause of that was, but he was kind of in and out of the house for several years, and ended up leaving home and started working when he was just 16 years old. But I did have the other three sisters, the two older sisters from my mom's first marriage, and then my younger sister, all at the house. So it was interesting growing up with three sisters in the house. I was the second to youngest of the six, and it was a tough adjustment. It was interesting trying to get along with two stepsisters and a younger sister, and it was an adjustment. I have listened to all of your podcasts, Lily, and I know some people say that they grew up knowing that something was out of place, something was missing. I never really had that feeling at all. If you put 12 people together in a room, 12 kids, you would never have guessed that the six of us were from the same family. None of us look alike. That wasn't five people with blonde hair and one brunette. We were all different body types. There was nothing that really stuck out growing up. I did have trouble with my weight when I was younger, and in fact, still to this day, struggle with that at times. So that was something that was difficult for me growing up as well. And then changing schools, as I mentioned earlier, was a challenge. I was teased a lot for my weight at different times, including in my youth. I had bulimia or anorexia, and it was a very difficult thing to work through at the time. Some of that teasing came from my own half sisters, and it was overall, I think a good upbringing, but there were certainly challenges, and likely from their perspective, challenges for them as well. So it was interesting. I
Mm.
was the first of the six kids, actually the first of any of the people in my family to go to college. I decided early on, even probably before high school, that when the time came, I wanted to provide better for my family than we had growing up. And again, it wasn't a knock on my parents at all. Like I said, we never went without a roof over our head or food on the table, but it was a struggle. I could tell for them it was a struggle financially and in other ways as well. So I knew that I was going to provide for a better lifestyle for the family when I was old enough to have one of my own. So um, I studied accounting in high school and enjoyed it, did really well. Decided to pursue that for a bachelor's degree. Right after that, went on to a master's degree and worked at a CPA firm, and before too long was hired away by a client, and I've been in public sector, either higher education or government, ever since for the last 25 years or so. So, I've been blessed, have been able to provide a good lifestyle for myself, for my daughter as well. So it's nothing that I can complain about. It was an interesting mix of struggle, and you know I I never really felt disconnected from my parents at all in terms of there being any real sign of an NPE situation. I I felt loved by my parents, both of my parents. I didn't never felt like there was really anything missing or any kind of disconnect other than what the things that I had mentioned before. So it was quite a shock when the NPE news did come along. Um,
Mm. Yeah. So you had no idea about this. Now, when did you find out, and how did you find out?
sure. So it was fairly late in life. This was about 7 years ago. I was 46 years old at the time. One of my half sisters, my from my mom's first marriage, she just out of the blue texted me, and I would normally not really hear from her. We're adults growing up, have lives of our own, families of our own, so we don't stay in constant contact or anything. So it was kind of out of the blue that she would text me. She just sent me a short message that said, "You should go talk to mom and dad," or she said his name. He was never dad to her, but he said you should go talk to him because apparently you're not his. And that was just completely out of the blue. I was really shocked. I didn't know what to think of it. This actually happened. I was checking back again today. It was actually a day after her birthday for whatever reason. I'm not sure what the significance of that is, but there were no real warning signs. As I mentioned, nothing seemed out of place. The only thing that came to mind later was my parents got married about 3 weeks after I was born. My mom said at the time that she didn't want to, her words, not mine, she didn't want to look fat when she got married. So they were married about 3 weeks after I was born. And that was kind of the excuse for why there's no father's name on my birth certificate. I didn't really know that at the time, not until I later on went to apply for college and financial aid and had to provide copies of birth certificate back then. And it wasn't until then that I noticed that there was no father's name listed on my birth certificate. And the the story that I was given at the time, and I didn't think anything of it really, was that there was no name there because they weren't married when I was born. They got married about 3 weeks after I was born. So looking back, I should have questioned that, I think, or pushed back. But at the time, I didn't really have a reason to question why there wasn't the name on my birth certificate for my father. So, it's maybe a small minor thing, but in the grand scheme of the NPE life and discussion and all that, everyone talks about birth certificate father. Well, I have no birth certificate father. I have a dad that I grew up with who provided for our family, but no one on the birth certificate itself for the father. So that was a little unusual. Again, nothing other than that appeared to be unusual or any red flags. So yeah, it was just a text message from my stepsister, just out of the blue. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that growing up, I'd noticed at one point that my dad was going to meetings on a pretty regular basis in the evenings, and so at some point I asked my mom what that was for, and she said that dad was going to counseling because he got in some trouble for touching my two stepsisters inappropriately. So I was fairly young at that time, 7 or 8 years old, I'm guessing, looking back. So very, very young, really didn't know what to make of it and didn't know the significance of it or how it impacted them and still impacts them to this day. And the only reason I mention that is one of the sisters that was impacted by this was the sister who texted me my NPE news. And I don't think it really had anything necessarily to do with me per se. She's had a strange relationship with both my mom and dad, and has really gone out of her way to blame my mom actually more so than my dad. I would think even to this day, with it being almost 50 years later, blaming my mom for, in her words, this is my stepsister's words, letting it happen. And so I think, again, all of this is the only reason I mention this is because I think it leads into why I was told what I was told when I was told it, because it had nothing to do with me. I don't think it had everything to do with punishing my mom for keeping the secret that she did of my NPE status. So there was one secret, one thing that she could hold over my mom, and one way to punish her by letting out the secret that she and everyone else in the family had. So, when I received this text message, I, of course, immediately contacted my mom. I happened to be in training that day, and we had just come back from lunch break, so I had 3 hours ahead of me in this training. And of course, my world is turned upside down at that moment, and I'm just counting the hours until I can get out of there and go have a conversation. So I at the time just texted my mom and said, "This is what happened. This is the text message that I got. Do you know anything about it?" And I was hoping it was just maybe a vindictive message that my stepsister had sent. It wouldn't have been completely out of the blue for her. And it wasn't. The response that I got from my mom was, "Stop by after your work and let's talk." And that was not the response I was hoping for. I knew at that moment that there had to be some nuggets of truth in the message that my stepsister sent me. So on my way home that evening, I did stop by my parents' house and had a conversation with mom and dad. And that's when my mom said that dad may not be my birth father. And it's unfortunate that she put it that way and that we kind of ended the conversation. There was more to the conversation than that, but ultimately at the end of that conversation that night, she left it with uncertainty that maybe dad is not your biological father. And I think that has had to do with her way of protecting me. As crazy as that might sound, I've been very close to my mom my entire life. She's has always been my best friend, someone that I confide, my secrets to someone who knows me better than really anyone else. And I think it was her way of protecting me to say that, well, maybe dad is your dad and just not certain. So this was a secret that everyone, one of the things I'd asked that night was, well, who else knows? And everyone, literally everyone in the family knew the story that dad may not be my father.
Mm.
And it was a real shock. I felt like the butt of a joke that everyone else was laughing at. I didn't anticipate the news, and I certainly didn't anticipate the fact that everyone else in the family knew except for me. Uh, Needless to say, it was quite a shock. Um, so we ended the conversation then essentially at, well, maybe dad isn't your dad. We're just not sure. So, I of course immediately started thinking of, well, maybe we can do DNA. I didn't mention anything at the time, but I thought, well, maybe we can do DNA tests or something like that. And I just kind of sat on it, frankly, at that moment, and told my wife right away, of course, but didn't really act on it or have another conversation with mom or dad about it for at least several weeks. I just was trying to deal with the shock, the initial shock of getting that news. And um, so, like I said, I didn't really do anything about it right away. I did start talking with my younger sister about potentially doing ancestry or some other type of test together that would be a little less invasive than having DNA tests with my parents. She didn't really say anything at the time, which again probably should have been a red flag. I found out later the reason she didn't is because after I did an ancestry test, it showed that we were half siblings. So there was some uncertainty based on the information that my mom and dad gave me at the time that I first found out that this might be a potential thing, and it was confirmed later through the ancestry DNA test. So, um, in sort of getting back to the theme of mom saying things to protect me, so the story went from maybe dad is your dad, maybe he's not, we're not sure. Not long after that, one part I left out was I had a conversation with my dad later, and as I mentioned, he grew up in a factory. He dropped out of school in middle school, went to work right after that, worked in the factory all of his life. Not a highly educated person, but very, very smart and wise in other ways. And he said, Shawn, the timing just doesn't work out. Your mom and I met, and 7 months later, there you were, and you were not premature. So he said, the timing just doesn't work out. So, of course, that piqued my interest and made me feel, of course, more and more like there was something to this. There wasn't uncertainty, at least from my dad's perspective. He was fairly certain at the time that I was not his child. My mom was divorced when they met. She was dating. He came into the picture, my dad, and then 7 months later, there I was. So the timing doesn't work out.
Mm.
So, as I mentioned later on, I did end up getting an ancestry DNA test, and that confirmed that dad, in fact, was not my biological father. So then later on, I just again because the story changed. First of all, maybe dad is your dad, maybe not. We don't know. To now, for sure, he's not your biological father. The story kept changing. I kept having to readjust my perspective and my understanding. And it seemed like every time the story changed, it was just another blow emotionally. And I just wasn't sure where to go at that point, what to do with that information. One of the things I did was, now dad's certainly not your biological father. So then I started the ancestry DNA and 23andMe and others, looking for potential matches, DNA matches. I did start finding some relatively close matches, and there were names that I really didn't recognize at all. So I just didn't know, what to do with that. And then another conversation with my mom at the time, the story then changed to, well, I was kind of working at a bar at the time and dating, and I think it was a one night stand, and I don't know who it was, or don't remember who it was. So that didn't really add a lot of clarity. I mean, it still left me in a position where I don't know who my biological father is. I guess there was some relief at that time. One of the things that I had specifically asked my mom, and again, the story keeps changing, so I don't know what to believe and what not. But one of the first things I asked her was, was this something that was the result of incest or rape? And she was very adamant that that was not the case. So that was, I'm not sure how I would have dealt with that personally, and working through that for how that would impact me potentially. But I was very relieved to hear for my mom, from my best friend, that was not a thing that she had to deal with, that wasn't the cause of how I was conceived. So at least that was some relief from that perspective, that knowing that that was not something that my mom had to deal with or had to live through. Later on, the story changed yet again. This was in total now about 2 years after my NPE news was shared. My mom, at that point, for some reason, finally shared the truth that she knew who my biological father was, that it was someone that she had gone to high school with. And at the time, again, my mom was divorced and dating. Somehow she reconnected with a high school crush, and one thing led to another, and I was the result of that reconnection. She had said at the time that she let him know that she was pregnant. So even back then, he knew that there was a child of his out there somewhere. She said that his response was, "I'm in a relationship. I'm not prepared to be a parent. So I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do for you." And so she was on her own as a pregnant future single mother. So this was all, again, real new to me, very shocking, very unexpected. It was, I think the first thing that struck me at that point was he knew 50 years ago, he knew that he had a child out there, and it just brought back, one of the things that I respected with my dad was he chose to be my father. It was not out of obligation. It was not because of a blood relationship. He chose to be my father. And I would hope that if I was ever in that situation, I'm very happily married and kids are in my past, but I would hope that if I was ever presented with a similar situation, that I would make the same choice, that I would raise the child as my own. Now, the thing I would do differently is not withhold the secret. But I had a lot of respect for my dad after learning my MPE news, and everything that came after that. Again, one of the shocks that I had was that my biological father knew way back when that he had a child, and he chose to do nothing about it. It's very, very hard news to receive at the time. I felt very rejected. Again, as a parent myself, I have a daughter now who's 23 years old. I can't imagine. I just I think I approach it not from a perspective of being judgmental, but again, if I was in that situation, how would I react? What choices would I make? And I cannot imagine not being a part of my child's life. I again, it's there may be all sorts of things that led to that decision to go down that path, and frankly to stay there, to never try to reach out. They were from a fairly small school, that he's still in the area, They have school reunions all the time. It would have been very, very easy to reconnect at some point. He chose not to do that. So with her or with me, one of the first things that struck me was just a feeling of rejection. Um, One of the other things that really struck me at the time too was growing up. I didn't really have a really, really strong relationship with my brother. He was about 10 years older than me. So by the time I really, was approaching teenage years, he was already long out of the house. And after um, growing up, as we became adults and had our own families, he never really made an effort to be a part of my family or include me in his family. And that was something that really, really bothered me growing up. It was, I made an effort, especially when I lived nearby him for a few years. I really made an effort, but it was really a one-way relationship, and it always bothered me that he never really made an effort to have a relationship with his brother. Again, just thinking from my perspective, how could you not be a part of your family members' lives? And one of the things that struck me when I learned of my NPE news originally was I have two half siblings that are now no longer blood related. I've lost part of my family. My dad's son and daughter from his first marriage are not my siblings by blood. And one of the things, it took me a while to get there, but one of the things that struck me was maybe that's why my brother never made an effort, because he knew the whole time that I wasn't his brother, not by blood anyway. My older sister from my dad's first marriage, she did make an effort. I didn't really think about it at the time, but even to this day, she goes out of her way to call me brother. And it's something that I didn't really think of too much at the time, but now I wonder if it's just because she knew the whole time that I wasn't her biological brother anyway. She grew up with her mom, as I mentioned earlier, so we didn't really have a close relationship at all. Now, when she calls me brother, I'm very happy to see her. She's a wonderful person and she has a great husband and very happy to see them. I just cringe inside now when she calls me brother, because I know it's not the truth. And there's more to family than blood. And sh- but also with her, there has always been a disconnect where not so much as with my brother, but with her, no real effort to really go out of her way to include me in their family. She more so than my brother did engage in holiday family get-togethers and other things. My brother didn't really make an effort at all. Not with me or with his dad, the father who raised me. So it was just very, very unusual. I'm still going through a lot of different emotions. Again, one of the things that I started doing with the news, and especially now that I had a name, was first cyber stalking and then illegally, and then building the family tree and doing the research and getting the birth certificate documents and all of that. I knew, for me that was something that was not a mystery. As I mentioned earlier, I've listened to all of your podcasts and all of them are different and everyone seemingly has a different story. Some of them, there's still a search. They don't know who that person is. For me, that it took a couple of years to get there, but I eventually had a name, and so I know who that person is. I've reached out to the DNA relationship connections that I found through 23andMe and Ancestry and others, and have had some responses from them. These, I think, were distant cousins of mine, but people who knew my biological father or know him, and I've had some interaction with them, and they've been forthcoming with some information. I learned about a year ago that my biological father had reached out to someone who I think is a second cousin of mine, and that person responded back to me saying that he had reached out to my biological father's current wife, who's a retired nurse, and apparently she said that my biological father has cognitive issues, which I took to mean either Alzheimer's or dementia. And the response back was that he was in no condition. I don't think he's auditory. I don't think he was in any condition to really have a conversation about me at all. So that was real hard news to get at the time, because it just brought another wave of sorrow. I knew finally who it was, and I had a name. And at the time when I got the name, I sent a letter to my biological father. It was fairly easy to find public property tax records online here, so I sent a letter to what I thought was his current address, and included a picture of myself and my daughter, his granddaughter, and said, "This is us." It was just a one-page letter with the picture, and I was going to leave it up to him to respond or not, and he never did. So after that, about 2 years after that, that's when I connected with this second cousin who had spoken to my biological father's current wife, and said that he was non-auditory and had advanced stages of either dementia or Alzheimer's. I wasn't sure which. So it just felt another sense of loss at that point. I was hoping that at some point there would be an opportunity to have some kind of conversation with my biological father, even though he had never made an effort, knowing that I existed 50 years ago. And then even when I tried to reconnect a few years ago with my letter, I was still holding out hope for maybe at least a phone conversation, an email back and forth to say, hey, here's the backstory. Here's what life brought me. Here's why I didn't reach out. And sorry, but I'd like to get to know you. And it was just a lot of grief at the time that I learned of his medical condition, and just knowing that there would never be that conversation or that connection. I've heard several people on your podcast in the past say that it's an interesting position to be in, to grieve something that you've never had, or to feel loss for something that you never had. But knowing that I never had a relationship with my biological father, and now knowing that I never will, it was a very, very hard thing to learn at the time. And it was about that point when I really had to disconnect. I was going through so much emotionally. I tried to find a counselor who was familiar with the MPE stories and the situation and what people are dealing with that go through that. And the counseling didn't really work out, or wasn't really helpful from my perspective. So it's still something that I'm trying to pursue. One of the things that I've thought of over the years, I've known about this now for 7 years, and my wife has been a great support. But it's also not really top of mind for her either. Occasionally, I will mention something, or she'll ask what I'm listening to, and I'll say a podcast of yours. And at one point she asked, "Oh, are you still thinking about that?" And I thought, and she's a very, very helpful, supportive, just a really good, outgoing person who puts others above herself. But unless you really know what the person is going through, I mean, this is something that never leaves us. It's always a part of my story now. It's not something that I'll overcome and put behind me. I mean, hopefully with counseling, with conversations, with groups, it'll be less and less of an issue to deal with, emotionally and otherwise. But I wish there were more resources out there for spouses of NPEs. And maybe there is, and I'm just not aware of them. But it would be really good to have a resource for spouses of NPEs who can be given tools or techniques or just information about what we as NPEs are really going through on an emotional basis, on a day-to-day basis.
And yes, I'll say to that, I agree. I wish there were more resources for partners of NPEs. I've read a couple articles, and I know there was recently a spouse track at a summit, but that would be so helpful. And as we continue to get more resources for NPEs, I hope that something comes out for the spouses as well. That's so
Right.
important. Now, do you have any siblings from your biological father?
No, he never had any other children besides myself, as far as I can tell.
He had no children and he didn't want to connect with you your whole life? That
Right.
is, oh, what a loss. What a loss for him.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that I've uncovered recently is apparently his mother, my paternal grandmother, lived, I can't imagine what they went through at the time when my biological father was born. His mother was a teenager, and this was back in the 40s. And I've found through online research over the years that my biological father has probably a half dozen half siblings. And so some of the people that I've been able to reach out and connect with actually, they know of my biological father, but I've never had a relationship with him either because his mother, has gone through or went through. She's no longer alive at this point. Had to have had a very trying. I don't know what it would have been like back in the 40s to be a pregnant single teenager at the time and going through that and just trying to get by. She had my biological father when she was a teenager. About 3 years later, she had another child, and there were a few others after that. And it's for so some of the mystery for me in the research and in the frustration of trying to find documents and genealogy and tracing things back isn't really with my father. It's with the extended family, with his mother and all of her other children that she had. And it's I don't know who my paternal grandfather is. That's another, it's just very, very interesting. There are a lot of resources available. Again, this may be another area where potentially more could be done. There are resources that are available to help connect people with biological parents. There are not as many resources available to help connect with other extended family.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish there were more options available. I've kind of just run out of patience at this point, and I just think I know who my biological father is. Maybe I just need to be content with that. That's it's trying to find anything beyond that is a little frustrating.
Has it ever crossed your mind to attend his funeral or memorial when, if that time comes?
I have thought about it. I'm not sure that I would necessarily know when that happens. The people that I have contacted who have responded and provided me with some very basic health information, uh, it's not really a continuing dialogue with them and me. So I don't know that I would necessarily know when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I have thought about it. I think if I did know, I probably would go attend his funeral when the time happens.
I know I've thought about it, and same with you. Like I wouldn't know necessarily when my birth father would pass. Um, I Google him every couple months just to see if I can find anything, and I don't know if a family member would tell me. I'm not in contact, but there's a part of me that's like, what if I just went and sat in the back row and just,
Right,
just so I could see
right.
see the family I'm related to that I never met.
Yeah, I think, when I've thought about it, I think for me, it would at least provide a sense of closure. Again, it's just such an interesting perspective to have, to grieve and feel loss for something that you've never had. But I think it would help provide, at least for me, some closure to that part of my life and the relationship that I wish I had that never happened.
And I know, Shawn, that you would be willing to accept any supportive emails or questions, but we will filter them through the NPE Stories email address. So if anyone wants to reach out to Shawn, they can email npestories@gmail.com and just mention it's episode 164, and I can send those along to Shawn. But Shawn, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your story and where you're at today. I thoroughly appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you, Lily.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.